Reverend Anita, you thought you could get away from the fruit of the Spirit, right? We have a very special guest with us today, director of the Quest program, working for our regional office, Reverend Anita Cobb. You'll hear from her in just a moment. And maybe she'll explain why she can't get away from the fruit of the Spirit. To begin our time together this morning, I have a question for us to consider. And that question is this: what would you say defines us as a church? If someone were to ask you, what's Downey Avenue Christian Church all about? What's your deal, man? What would you say? Would you point to this beautiful building? Would you talk about the music in our worship service? Would you talk about the mission work that we do with our community partners? Would you share about our ministry teams that serve the church and the neighborhood? Or would you go deeper? In Galatians chapter 5 that Josh just read for us, verses 22 through 26, the Apostle Paul gives us language for that something deeper. He describes the fruit of the Spirit. Raise your hand if you've heard that expression before. The fruit of the Spirit. Not to be confused with the fruit of the loom. Those are two different things, but both provide great support. The fruit of the Spirit, however, is a vision not just for our individual character, but for a community identity. Let's hear the passage again. Now, be aware that the passage begins with by contrast, because what the Apostle Paul, who's writing here, is comparing the fruit of the Spirit to is what he's shared in earlier verses, what he calls the fruit of the flesh, things like envy, drunkenness, jealousy, anger, and even carousing. I had to look up what carousing meant because I don't know. It turns out it's really just drunkenness. So drunkenness twice. So the Apostle Paul says here, the fruit of the Spirit, in contrast to all those things, is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit. And today, I want to invite all of us to reflect inward for a moment, to ask ourselves what we think might be the core values that define our church. And to ask, why does it matter that we know them? Does it matter that we're able to express them clearly? As we begin to do that, let's start with prayer. Be in prayer with me, please. Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us. Open us, our ears, our hearts, our minds to the ongoing revelation that is your good news on this day and every day. Amen. We are in the midst of a sermon series called Made You Look. This is our second week of 4. Last week we took a look back, and today we are looking inward. Next week, we are going to look outward, and then on Homecoming Sunday, we are going to look forward. So today, let's take a moment and look inward just a little bit. Let's start by going back to that Galatians text that we've been talking about. I want you to notice, I think we have a slide here. Notice in Galatians that Paul doesn't say the fruits of the Spirit, plural. Paul says fruit of the Spirit, singular. One fruit, 9 qualities. It's like a cluster of grapes. One fruit, as opposed to 9 apples in a basket. Each part is essential to the other. Each is connected. Together, they form a picture of a spirit-shaped community. Let's walk through each of them briefly, shall we? Not just as individual traits, but as a portrait of the church. First, there is love, the kind that sacrifices, that includes, that sees. There's joy, deep Christ-rooted gladness, not surface happiness. Peace that reconciles differences, not just avoids conflict. Patience, especially with those who try us. Kindness, extended when no one's watching. Generosity of time, of welcome and resources. Faithfulness, even when it's not convenient. Gentleness, strength under control, not to be confused with weakness. Self-control, putting integrity over impulse. Now let's ask ourselves, if someone visited Downey for the very first time, would they experience this fruit? Would they walk away from this place saying, man, those are people of peace, of kindness, of love? Not perfectly, of course, but noticeably, faithfully. These are not just aspirations. They are measurable expressions of a spirit-led life together. They are the very components that should shape our core values as a community of faith. And here's why I think that it matters that we're able to articulate them as core values. Because if we don't know our core values, we can't live them. And if we don't live them, then we misrepresent Christ by calling ourselves the Christian church. Galatians chapter 5 doesn't end with Paul listing the fruit of the Spirit. It ends with a summation that says, if we live by the Spirit, then let us also be guided by the Spirit. That fruit that represents what the Spirit's guidance looks like in real life should be ours on the vine, if we indeed are being led by that Spirit. That verse in particular, when connected with the description of all the fruit, gives us a foundation and a direction for moving forward. To live in step with the Spirit, to make decisions and set priorities and form habits that reflect the Spirit's work within us. So how do we measure whether we're living by the Spirit or not? I hate to confess it, but it's not by how full our calendar is. It's not by how many events and activities and fundraisers we have going on here at the church. And it even pains me more to say it's not by how polished our services or our sermons are. It's not by how many people we have on our roll as members, but by whether we see the fruit as a real result of our life together. Many of you may have seen or at least heard of the TV show Ted Lasso. Yes? Ted Lasso fans? Ton, big fan, right? Okay. After service today, I can tell you the story of when I spent a week with Jason Sudeikis' sister in Ireland. It's true, Lindsay Sudeikis. We're Facebook friends. It's the story, it's true. True story. Ted Lasso is the story of an American football coach hired to manage a British football team, or what we would call soccer. Now, Ted Lasso knows absolutely nothing about soccer, but what he does know is people. Ted leads with this undeniable optimism despite the abysmal situation into which he is thrust in Richmond in England, a losing team with very bad habits and even worse character. But more importantly, when Ted gets there, he leads not just with optimism, but with his values as his guide. He's kind in a cynical world. He listens instead of shouting. He forgives instead of retaliating. And gradually, his players on this terrible soccer team begin to take notice, and they too begin to change. They begin to embody those same values: trust, vulnerability, teamwork, accountability. Now, central to the show is a simple sign that Ted writes with a marker and hangs in the locker room. What does that sign say to the Ted Lasso fans here? Believe. It's not just decoration for the locker room. It becomes a shared commitment and expression of the values of their team, a symbol for them of the way that they choose to function together as a team, to believe in one another. It becomes an identity that shapes not only who they are, but how they begin to play the game as one. Now, Ted Lasso is fiction for sure, but it points to a real truth. That when a community is clear about its values and lives them consistently, transformation happens. So here's what I want us to consider. What is our locker room sign at Downey Avenue Christian Church? What do we believe in together? What do we hang up? Not just on our walls, but in our hearts, that becomes our compass through this life together. If we take Galatians 5 seriously, maybe our sign says, "Let the Spirit lead." That maybe is easier said than done. Are you sitting there wondering, what does that even mean, Melody? Let the Spirit lead? Is that just another way of saying, Jesus, take the wheel? Well, maybe we do a couple of things to make that our reality, even more so. One might be to practice spiritual discernment. Before we decide, we ask, is this thing, this decision, going to bear the fruit of the Spirit? Are we choosing patience, or are we choosing productivity instead? Are we moving with faithfulness or reacting out of fear? Let's be a church that prays before we plan. Sometimes those prayers will equip us with the language that we need to say, no, thank you. That's too much for right now. It's not what the Spirit has for us, though it may be good. It's not ours. Another thing might be to make space for communal reflection. Reflection is not a luxury, it's a necessity. What if at every elders gathering, or every administrative council meeting, or every meeting we had as a church, we took 5 minutes or more to ask, where did we see love this month in our community? Where do we as a community need more gentleness or more peace? What fruit on the vine is lacking? Before we get to the business of our church. When we reflect, we realign back to the center of our core values. And then finally, we tell the truth about ourselves. That's what being led by the Spirit looks like. It doesn't mean pretending to be perfect. It means being honest about where we fall short and asking God to grow us. Let's be a church that says we haven't arrived at perfection quite yet, but we're listening, we're growing, and we're willing to be led. That kind of humility from the church is powerful and rare. And I dare say it's the very thing that people have been looking for from the church for generation after generation after generation. But also in telling the truth about ourselves, we should be able to celebrate the ways in which we are bearing the fruit of the Spirit. Yes? We should be open to sharing how and when we've experienced transformation as a result of following our locker room signs directives. To that end, I've invited our dear friend and librarian, Mika Baird, to come on up, Mika. She's going to share one of her poems with us about the ways in which this community of faith has shaped her life and helped her articulate her own core values as a result of us leaning into ours.
This is a poem called What God Has Done. Let us reflect on what God has done through the Spirit and the Son. In this body where Spirit dwells, living water drawn from the well. Christ has moved within his church, and through us he has worked to bring good news to those who seek and loving kindness to those in need. Yesterday's seeds were sown, now it is up for us to grow, and we shall plant even more, that those who come may reap just as before. As I reflect on the souls that have been touched and made whole by God and through our mission, by our living for the vision, I think about how God has moved in mine, for she has given me hope in a brand new life. Compared to the life I've lived before, I have found a life worth so much more. A community where I can truly belong, a place that I can call my church home. You see, one day I slept right there outside at the front door step. Before that, I was living my life in chains, bound to addiction, and I thought my life would never change. 24/7, every day of the week, I got so high that I would never sleep. But then one day I walked into my room, and there were a gang of people who brought me to my doom. They attacked me, and then they threatened to kill me. Then they stripped me naked to expose me for being trans. Yet here today I am blessed to stand. When they rushed me out, I lost my house. I was desperate and needed a place to rest my head. So the first place I thought was to come straight here. By the door I slept, filled with so much fear. Now since, this church has become my sanctuary, a place where I can truly be free. No longer to addiction am I bound, here a new life has been found. 111 is the address I saw right there on the front door. I was so desperate to change the life that I lived before. 111 to me means a brand new beginning. Now I have a life worth truly living. I have found a church that accepts someone like me, for I've been told to take off that dress and be who God made me to be. I've also been judged for the books I like to read. In churches past, I've never been allowed to truly be. They sought to only change me with indoctrination, and then have the nerve to call it transformation. But I have found that this church accepts me as I truly am, has fed me with food and by the living bread. Downey Avenue has been a blessing in my life. It was through this church that God has led me to the light. No longer in the shadows do I hide. My past is a shady one that I left behind. Sent now in the presence, every moment is a gift, sent on the wings of a dove with a kiss. The love that God has shown is a love that I have never known. God has led me to the sun, where life has just begun. In each coming day, I will follow in his way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mika. That's what following our locker room sign looks like. It's what it means to be the church that we say we are, as our general minister and president likes to say, not just on the website, not just in the bulletin, but in our decisions and in our culture, in our relationships with one another. Because the world, beloved ones, is not looking for perfect churches. They are just looking for real churches with real people, Spirit-led ones, fruit-bearing ones. So let's not just be the kind of people, as we look inward, that like to talk about our core values. Let's live them and be shaped by them. Let's bear fruit that lasts for eternity. And let's commit together to be guided by the Spirit, so that every Mika who comes to our doorstep will know love and peace and patience and gentleness and kindness and self-control and joy as the fruit of the Spirit. Thanks be to God. Amen.